Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society's Historical Group and to this latest in a series of collection and archive talks around the history of photography. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce our host, Gilly Read, who's chair of the RPS's Historical Group. Chair, Gilly, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I will have pleasure in introducing Clare Thompson, who is our speaker tonight, and she's from the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, where she has been based for 10 years. And she says there's not much that she's not interested in, but the history of Glasgow, women's history, legacies of empire and slavery, and the hidden histories of marginalised communities and people are her particular favourites. So I think this will be actually a very interesting talk. And she certainly gave us a very interesting visit when we all went on a group visit to Glasgow. So please, I'm introducing Clare. It's over to you now, Clare. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilly. Okay, I'm going to hang up on, I'm going to leave and introduce myself. So thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I'm from the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, where we have a huge number of collections, particularly relating to Glasgow, and William Graham collection is one of them. So William Graham, you can see a picture of him here by the River Kelvin. He was born 1847 and died in 1914. He lived most of his life in the Springburn area of Glasgow in the north of the city. Initially, he was employed as a printer with Bell and Bain, and he went on to work for the North British Railway Company as an engine driver and a locomotive fireman. In 1869, he married his first wife, Mary Morton. At that time, they were living in Dunn Street in Springburn, and when their daughter was born in 1869, they had moved to Colgrane Terrace. And Colgrane Terrace was a sort of row of houses, cottages that were provided by the railway employers, back to Dunn Street for the birth of their son. In the 1871 census, he's living with his wife, 2 children, his wife's brother and sister, and 2 nephews, and his son had just been born. 2 days after the census, in 1871, his wife died of puerperal fever, which was a sort of common illness for women at the time. And sadly, his son died 5 months later at the home of his grandparents from a disease called tabes mesenterica, which is tuberculosis affecting the lymphatic system caused by drinking unpasteurized cow's milk. So essentially, he didn't have his mother's milk, so he sadly died. 2 years later, Graham remarried a woman called Catherine Wilson, and this is a picture of them here with a dog. I don't know if it's their dog, but it's a dog. At that point, he was working as a journeyman iron turner. So again, a sort of working man. He went on to work as a wine cooper in Portland Street in Glasgow. And then in 1891 census, we find him as a railway engine driver living in Colgrane Terrace again, in that house provided by his employer. So 1891 census, this was 4 months after a major strike of Scottish railway workers employed by the North British, the Caledonian Railway and South Western Railways. It's been estimated that at least 8,000 men went out on strike at any one time in Scotland. The effect on the industries of Scotland of the strike were significant because it curtailed the supply of coal, and shipbuilding yards, engineering works and factories all closed their doors. The causes of the strike, the reasons for the strike were conditions of employment, primarily long hours, sometimes up to 30 hours at a stretch. They proposed wages of time-and-a-quarter for overtime, and the workers had approached the management with their concerns without satisfactory results. And the strike was viewed by the directors of the companies as a breach of contract. They took quite took action evicting men and families from their houses, and in some cases sued them for breach of contract. But as a result of the industrial action, the Glasgow and South Western Railway granted the principle of a 60-hour working week. So it's very kind of them. Here's some photographs of some of the working men here, some ambulance men, some men laying tracks for a station. And these photographs, all these photographs that I share are by William Graham himself. And here are the men leaving the Hyde Park locomotive works at 5:30. Quite an atmospheric picture there. You see the date there, 1900. It was after he left his job working there, but he retained an interest in that and documenting that working life of people in Glasgow. So, William Graham's lifelong hobby was photography. Between 1892 and 1893, he left or was suspended from his job as an engine driver, possibly as a result of industrial action. And he took up the full-time profession of a photographer. So that was living at 468 Springburn Road. He continued to be a photographer until his death in 1914. And we have a lovely newspaper report of his work in 1909. The Weekly Herald reported, "Mr. William Graham, photographer, is well known to many in the city and will perhaps be better known 100 years hence, when the folks of 2009 may be studying his curious collection of pictures of the Glasgow of today and of the past 100 years. His pictorial stories have been frequently called on to supply material for illustrated lectures, and they are always available for the newspaper press of the city." So this explains quite a lot in that you've probably seen quite a lot of these photographs in books, newspapers, and postcards of the time, which he probably sold from his studio, but often it's not clear who the photographer is, so you just kind of often find that old photographs of Glasgow of that period are his. So this is William Graham again in his later years, and the handsome chap on the right hand side is his friend William Young. He kept a collection of scrapbooks and included a lot of William Graham's photographs, as well as newspaper articles, letters, invitations, and cards. These scrapbooks are also kept in the Mitchell Library, and it can actually be used as a sort of explanatory guide to some of Graham's images. So in 1916, after Graham's death, negotiations were underway to purchase his collection of negatives and also lantern slides for the Mitchell Library because of their Glasgow interest. However, Bailey Hutchison, who was in the town council, convener of the libraries committee, decided to purchase the collection privately and presented it to the Mitchell Library as a memento of his 3 years' service as convener. And sometime later, the widow of Catherine Graham, of William Graham, Catherine, handed over a number of prints that had been made from these negatives. She also provided indexes and lists of some of the photographs that inform our understanding of the collection today. So this is what they look like. These are the negatives are stored in boxes according to size. We've got whole plate on the left-hand side, half plate, quarter plate, and lantern slides, which is the smallest one. You can see that some of them have deteriorated with age, but they are now conserved properly, and we can still get prints from most of them. There. Apologies. There's his wife again. I've just dropped in a couple of lovely pictures of a quarter plate camera that he might have used. This is a camera that's in Glasgow Museum's collection. Nice stinky one. And a nice half plate camera from the Science Museum. And a lantern slide projector. Now, I wanted to include this picture here when the historical group came to visit the Mitchell Library, one of the members, Roger, very kindly brought his lantern slide projector so that we could project some of the lantern slides, and it was a real pleasure to see them the way they may have been seen at the time. That's a picture of it there. So that's William Graham. Oh yes, excuse me. He was also an original member of the Old Glasgow Club, subscribing frequently to its transactions. He used his photographic skill to record the subjects of Glasgow interest. So this is what I'm going to go on to show you lovely pictures of. He literally photographed everything: cart horses, cathedrals, buildings, churches, mansions and slums, inns, shops, relics and people. Illustrations from books and old prints and pictures were also included, and there really is quite a sharp focus on Springburn, where which was his home. So I am going to go through some photographs, firstly of Glasgow, then focus on Springburn, talk a little bit about his work and heritage and as a member of the Old Glasgow Club, and then some lovely photographs of some humans of Glasgow. So to begin, we have a picture here of a lovely warehouse in Antigua Place, where there's no date. We can assume that it's between 1890 and 1914. And you'll see on the bottom right here, there's a little scrape on the plate. So that says W59, which means that if you ever come across like collections of these, because they come up on eBay and antique shops all the time, if it's got that sort of wee W, it means that it's a William Graham. This is a photograph of a building in Calton in the east end of the city, and you can see the sort of shops and offices around, and the police officer looking quite bemused at the photographer, probably setting up his kit. Again, Rotten Row, a place in Glasgow that it looks nothing like it looked, and you find that's what William Graham caught. He was catching things that were on their way out as buildings, and he wanted to capture that for posterity. Here's some children in a close in Rotten Row. We have a nice shop here, Hoserian underwear, with a sort of lovely lovely sign, and it is just a real shame you can't see the photographs of this. The colour that might have been the door and the wrought iron and things like that. We have the clothes market. I'll move on later to the sculptured stone, but you can see up on the top that thing that makes buildings so unique, the carvings and things that are on them. He was very interested in that. Here we have St Andrew's Parish School. Now at this point it was occupied by a rag merchant, so it was no longer being used as a school, and you can see up the top the date of the school having been built. It looks like 1840, established 1849. So 60 years later, it was then being used by a rag merchant for a shop. So the kids must have moved on. Here's a lovely one, which I just think looks nothing like Glasgow. A sort of playbill for the Princess Theatre, and it seems to be a play called Knife Fight, which hopefully would have had some lovely stage fighting and things like that in them. In it, it just gives a real sense of the city in terms of the culture as well, and you can see the lovely coffee, tea, and cocoa available in the tea rooms. He was also interested in, people before him, for example, Thomas Annan, and the grand houses of the city. So this is a view of Castlemilk Castle, and you'll find a similar view of that castle taken by Thomas Annan. lovely detail on this one is the sort of scrape at the bottom where he has written what it is a picture of. That can sometimes be really helpful to us when we're trying to work out what an image is. He has very helpfully written on the negative for us, which is great. I like to focusing in not just the whole building. Here's a doorway with a really beautiful door, and the window, probably coloured glass above the window. It's quite stylish there. There's another photograph of the family standing outside that house, so he was obviously visiting them for a cup of tea. Back into the city, into Hope Street, we have the Royal Arcade and a Theatre Royal, or certainly a theatre there on the right hand side. But what is quite fascinating are just all the sort of posters and playbills that you see pasted up. We've got so many of these theatre playbills in the Mitchell Library, and just to see them the way that they would have been presented is really just helps to understand context for them. This is Drygate, down probably just below where the Glasgow Necropolis is now. And you can see those houses are in quite bad repair. This is an interesting institution, the former Mechanics Institute and Library. The artist William Simpson attended that institute. It was a sort of a working class place of education, and William Graham obviously saw it as somewhere that it was important to record. You can see the young lads standing on the left hand side. Maybe they're waiting for a wee lecture. Moving on again to William Simpson, he was seen as an important person in Glasgow history, so he went to his birthplace and photographed it on the front and on the back. So that's just down by the where the Broomielaw is now, and the way this is presented, it's just a sort of, the way I take it is that, you know, to show his humble origin sort of thing. We have a nice tavern, a very dapper barman here, and someone with a pony and trap, maybe waiting to take someone home after their pint of beer. Another pub, quite a lot of pubs here in Glasgow, and very rarely William Graham will put the exact date that he takes a photograph. So you can see that there, that's the 20th of July, 1898. I see that I've put 1900 on the right, so I've made a mistake there. And there's some lovely windy hanging ladies just above the doorway of the Wine and Spirit Merchant. Going back to nature, we have the River Kelvin here at Dosham Reservoir, I believe it's called. So it's actually a really lovely photograph of a lovely winter photograph of that. Just to sort of see the movement of the water is very attractive. Back to the streets. This is an incredible photograph of a tram, and it was celebrating the end of the Boer War. So the trams have been lit up by light bulbs, and so it was obviously a really big day in the city, big deal in the city at that time, and you can just imagine those trams going along like a sort of disco bus. Again, we've got the county buildings. This is now a very lovely establishment called Citation. So this is the Sheriff Court, and you can see the chaps standing outside there looking at the hoardings on the front. There's a very similar photograph of Trongate, and what the men are doing there are reading the electoral register. probably to check if they're on it so that they can vote. We've got a nice open top tram car in Castle Street with a nice big queue of people waiting for the tram. This is a lovely photograph of an exterior pulpit. So the church was on the inside of the building, but this pulpit enabled the minister to preach out onto the street, I guess. That's in the Brigate. And we've got an image of Parkhead Cross. I mean, it seems like it might be a weekend day, just with all the men sitting around having a smoke and having a chat. It's a really atmospheric photograph there. It's certainly 3:10, as we can see from the from the camera. And a nice hoarding on the gable end there. Got another one, Parkhead Cross, and this is a really interesting thing that Graham captures. It's a sign that says we're moving around the corner. So, but obviously you wouldn't have any other way to present that. So it gets painted on the building, which is quite a nice moment in time. This is a department store called Bonanza, which I smiled when I heard about. You can see they sell lace curtains, gents hosiery, carpet squares, pictures. It's just a very lovely building, and we're probably looking from just beside St Enoch's Centre Station. Is possibly sort of up on a up high, just at the St Enoch's Centre Hotel. It's a really busy day down there in the St Enoch's Centre. Yep, we've got some more men checking the electoral roll on the Tron Gate here. This is quite an interesting image of Buchanan Street Station, which we just, and you can see actually the condition of the plate isn't great. But the fact that Graham has scraped on the plate, opened 1st November 1849, you can see it tells us why he's taking these photographs. He's taken them for posterity. He's taken them so that we can remember our history and the history of the city. And we've got a nice messy wall here with all the advertisements for Nestle and something about Celtic on the left-hand side in Greendyke Street. Because there are so many photographs, I can't go into detail about absolutely every location, so that's why I'm sort of describing them. I've got another sort of shop, medical hall type, a sort of multi-purpose building here, with the ice cream confections on Clyde Street, which is Broomelaw, or Canning Street. Yeah, I can see that on the building. The oldest house in Rotten Row, built in 1683, and right now Mrs. Jane Gunn is inhabiting that shop and house, selling oils and colours, snuffs and tobacco. And here we have a brilliant photograph of this laundry cart, and the chap's very serious there about getting his photograph taken. He's definitely not going to do any flossing or anything like that. He's quite serious and professional here, and that's in White Inch in the west of the city. And this one, the last of the Glasgows, is a view from the bottom of Ingram Street, from Candle Rigs. It seems like quite a quiet day. And something that people that were interested in the history of Glasgow at the time, the Mall and Diner Burn, which ran through the sort of historic centre of the city. There's a photograph of it here, now covered over. Okay, so on to Springburn. Springburn, as we saw from a lot of the photographs of the workers, was an industrial area. It's had railway yards. It was the centre of the sort of railway industry, I guess, in Glasgow. Lots and lots of different companies, but you can see from this map here just the amount of humanity that's going on here. Vulcan Street here was where Graham had his studio. You can see there's a Masonic hall, a mission hall, a billiards hall, a cinema, 2 schools, a training centre, an orange hall, a bank. You know, this is a vibrant and thriving community. But to some extent it is quite rural, so that this would have been, you know, the buildings of Springburn would have been behind him here, looking over the fields, because this was all fields once. He was interested in people, and here we've got the Springburn Fire Brigade with their absolutely beautiful fire engine. Very proud to be on their uniforms there. Springburn had a number of municipal areas and institutions, like any area in Glasgow. One of them is Springburn Park. This is an area called the Grotto, and I do wonder who these ladies are standing up on the bridge with their beautiful hats on. This is Old Moses Field House in Springburn, again, in that kind of tradition of photographing the mansions and the big houses of Glasgow. This is an amazing photograph because it makes me very hungry. It's a display of what can only be described as pumpkins. And I know it's black and white, but just the colour of it must be absolutely incredible. This was in Springburn Park Winter Gardens, so it must have been harvest time. People were growing their produce and putting them on display. But it's just one of those photographs where you just want a bit of colour in there and you just got to imagine. I suppose you could go into Sainsbury's and see all the pumpkins that are in just now. And then again, we have this beautiful chrysanthemum display. And these palms inside the Winter Gardens. And the Winter Gardens was like many parks in Glasgow, the Winter Gardens was a building where people could gather inside as well as having the park to gather in. We have a lovely choir photograph of Springburn Parish Church, and just to kind of show the vibrancy, I guess, of the people. These are the faces of the people of Springburn, I guess, in their Sunday best. This occasion must have been quite the day. It's the laying of the foundation stone of Masonic Lodge in 1908, and you can see obviously all the members of the organisation, but then all the people hanging out of the window. There must be about 150 of them. They've all came to that side of the building to see this great occasion. There would have been speeches, maybe some music, and it's just nice to see all the people you know, of that area together. William Graham was involved in a Masonic lodge called Lodge Athole, which I believe is still in existence. Bit more domestic, in Springburn we have a lovely coffee house, and he likes to catch animals as well, so you can see on both the right and the left hand side the people have taken their dogs for a walk while they get their aerated waters. Back to Springburn Park, we have this beautiful bandstand, and this is in 1912. This is quite a well-known photograph. When I talked about Graham being, you'll look at a photograph and recognise it. This is in all the old Springburn, all the books about Old Springburn that we have in the library. And that was Graham that would have taken that photograph. This photograph is sort of mixing up that open spaces and the tenement houses that they had there in Springburn. And another church, and you can see how closely the streets were packed. More shops, boot and shoe shop, and everyone's came out to smile for William. And this is a really interesting building called the White House. You find it in the newspapers of the time. It was a sort of a lodging house for young men. And it's just a very strange image because it looks as if it's sitting there alone. So, on to William Graham as a recorder of Glasgow's heritage, and with a particular interest in the sort of sculptured stone. So I wanted to make sure that, even though we've got it in our collection description, that William Graham really, really was a member of the Old Glasgow Club. And you can see it here. This is the transactions of the Old Glasgow Club, and he's listed here at 468 Springburn Road. This is the first transactions in 1900. You can see other names that will come up. For example, Thomas Lugton, who was the keeper of the People's Palace, and also William Young, his friend. And we are lucky enough to have the minutes of the first minute book of the Old Glasgow Club put into the Mitchell Library for safekeeping in 1977. The rest of the minute books are with the Old Glasgow Club in the Trades House in Glasgow. Quite why we've got the first one, I do not know. But you can see here, halfway down, this is the meeting on the 17th of March 1913, a year before Graham's death. The following gentlemen took part in the discussion which followed the talk on the shop signs of Old Glasgow, Messrs Murdoch, Lugton and Graham. So you can imagine them having a lovely discussion after their lecture. All of the Old Glasgow Club's lectures were published in transactions, and they're often used as sources for further historical work during the 20th century. So this is a really interesting one of something that you will currently find in the Kelvin Grove Museum, Fulton's Orrery, which is a working model of the solar system. And this is a photograph of it while it was in the People's Palace. So it's just really interesting to think about those, you know, how those objects are moved about and presented in different ways throughout the city. This is a lovely picture of the staff of the People's Palace, photographed in the Winter Gardens in 1903. Some of the beautiful palms and I suppose like Springburn Winter Gardens behind them. Now, this wonderful woman is Rita Boyd, and when I was looking through William Graham's collection and found that she was within the collection, I did a little squeal, because she was one of the first women members of the Old Glasgow Club. You see them discussing the possibility of women members joining in the minutes, and it was proposed by John Ord, who was the superintendent of police, that women join, and they had a vote, and it was a sort of very close run thing, but they did say that women could join and go along, so you start to see them in the minutes. But it's a sort of just to kind of see her in her, she's been presented as a scholarly person. She has her book and her pen in front of her. She has her artifacts on the shelf above. We've got Burns up there, and the fire behind it. I think it's just a really lovely photograph. I've seen her photograph over in later years, but I think this is quite a rare one over in her young years. So the idea of sculptured stones as a sort of document of the city's history is very interesting. There's a whole volume scrapbook, I think, put together by William Graham of sculptured stone. So it's not just things like this, which is rather supposed to be a piece of Rutherglen Castle, which is in a wall in Cambuslang. I'd like to go and try to find out if it's still there. And the wee boy with his toys. This is a page of the scrapbook of the sculptured stone. So you can see here, it's not just that idea of coats of arms, but also markers. So the one right in the middle here that says Glasgow Botanic Gardens, instituted 1817. I walk past that most days on my lunch break. It's in a couple of blocks down from the Mitchell Library, but it's actually about 12 feet up from the ground. So how he got such a face-on photograph, I've got no idea. But you can see here, he actually sometimes makes sketches of the sculpture, and we've got a sort of scary face up the top, which must have been part of a building. And then also that sculpture on fence, gateways and doors and things like that, and also gravestones as well. Here's a lovely sketch of what looks like sort of artifacts of an area. So the sort of things that make that area. This lovely number here is refers to an index that I need to check to see exactly what that one is. But it has lots of wee parts like that, maybe where he couldn't get the photograph quite right, so he sketches it. And lastly, we're going to move on to some humans. He wasn't just interested in buildings. Here we have Victoria Park and the Fossil Grove and the portrait of its founder, obviously part of that historic establishment in Glasgow at the time. He didn't photograph many women, so I've tried to include them all. And this is obvious. This is a bobbin winder in a sort of attic of a building, doing her spinning. This photograph, as you see it here, is pasted into William Young's scrapbook. So he took prints of William Graham's and put them in his scrapbook. So he obviously had that sort of interest in sort of industry and working class lives, I guess. And this Reverend James Dickey of Springburn Parish Church, he's holding a lovely spade, which presumably still exists. It's engraved probably with the dates and the information about the founding of the church. If we think about what Thomas Annan did in terms of documenting the city in the late 1860s, we sometimes think of him taking the photographs of the slums in High Street and off Trongate and things like that, and then And then the City Improvement Trust improved the city, built these tenements. But this photograph would have been taken, you know, later. So it's not I guess it wasn't an instant thing. But to Coleman and his lovely wee dog and beautiful horse there for Cowlairs Cooperative Society, which a common organisation in all areas of Scotland and the UK. Cooperative Society. An incredible image here. The label says Argyll Street at the corner of Virginia Street, but I mean, it looks like he's on a railway line, so it may be a workshop or something like that. But I think, and you can tell me at the end what you think this is, I think he's getting his hair cut, and someone's looking on there, and he's got a very, very fancy sort of cape to keep the hair out of his jumper with big holes in it. This woman is a milkmaid working at Black Hill Farm. I haven't had enough time. All these sort of descriptions of people as, you know, coal man and things like that. What I would really love to do is, you know, put names to these people who were the people who were part of the history of Glasgow. These chaps are the Scots Greys regiment at Maryhill Barracks, and these chaps were the farriers and vets. And for some reason, they've got a little lovely apprentice there in his sailor suit, which is very cute indeed. At Springburn Park, we've got these curlers out for the day, maybe on a Sunday. The pond had frozen over enough so that they could have a wee game of curling with their brooms. Again, this sort of really characterful group of soldiers with their little dog on the left-hand side, and for some reason they've labelled their ale barrel, but also labelled their rat box. I'm not sure why. Maybe that was the trap or something like that. More working men, these blacksmiths, and he's scraped the name of the men underneath them, which is really good to put faces to names to faces. We're almost nearing the end. So a few more humans. Stationer, newsagent and tobacconist there on Springburn Road with the whole family outside, and the lovely posters showing the newspaper what's going on. And this lady here, it says in the label, in the list, it says Smith, portrait of Dr. Smith's wife. Dr. Smith's wife, who may or may not have a name, but I think that this person actually looks like William Graham's wife, so I need to do a wee bit of more comparing of things. This really interesting one, the photographers among you will sort of be able to maybe tell me what this is, but it looks like a sort of you know, painted background. On the label it says a cloth, but it looks like it's painted on the brick wall. It's almost like a publicity photograph. Here's what the photographer's doing, here's how they do it. We have a police officer helping two blind men to cross the road to work at the blind asylum. It's quite a nice soft photograph, that one. And a lovely procession to mark the opening of the 1901 exhibition in Glasgow. This is must have been a Springburn character, Cuddy Tam, and it looks like he's just harvested all the rhubarb, which makes him very hungry, and he's presumably taking it around to sell it. It's just nice how it sort of places that person from Springburn in the context of Graham's studio. And we have a tug of war team to lead us towards the end. Some lovely strong men, the Northern Police tug of war team, with their well-earned medals and trophies. More sports. So the Northern Police sports, they would have got together to sort of for recreation. And here's a really interesting picture of cyclists. So they must have been going pretty fast. Snap them. And a really lovely group of Dr. Gourley's staff of servants. Now, I haven't managed to track down who Dr. Gourley is, but we have a really lovely similar photograph of women who are working in the Glasgow libraries at the time, and their hairstyles are just so similar, that sort of really voluminous bun they must have had at the back. So these are lovely professional ladies posing with their colleagues. And to finish up, this is from William Young's scrapbook, and it sort of brings William Graham's life to a close. He spent all of his life recording and engaging with the heritage of Glasgow with his friends. And this postcard here is painted into the scrapbook. It says, "My postcard to write, alas, the last note to me from my old and esteemed friend William Graham, photographer, Springburn. It's dated 9th July. On invitation, he came and took tea with me on Tuesday 14th July and spent the evening with me, in the best of health and spirits. His interesting photographic records of Old Glasgow figure largely throughout these scrapbooks of mine and form an outstanding and valuable feature of them. He died very suddenly of cerebral hemorrhage on Wednesday morning at 4:30, 22nd July. In his earlier days, he was an engine driver on the old Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway and afterwards on the North British Railway. I attended his funeral today from Springburn to Southern Acropolis, Western Division." And you can see his last postcard said that he was going to come along and see him. So that's William Graham, the William Graham collection. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about him.
That was fantastic, Claire, and what a wonderful, wonderful set of photographs they are. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I just wanted to start by asking you whether Graham, did he write about his own photography and his own thinking behind the compilation of the photographs that he was taking?
Not that we can find very much of. He did. He sort of wrote to newspapers, and but it was generally about his recollections of being an ambulance man in the railways and things like that. It wasn't really about his work as a photographer, and it's almost like he disappears from how we understand the collection, because he doesn't even, like the little scrapbook of the monumental sculpture and things like that, his name isn't on it, so I'm only assuming that was his. He has some little we've got some really lovely things. For example, a little paper covered book pamphlet about how to make lantern slides. So he obviously researched his craft, but he's never, as far as I know, and maybe some of the people here today will be able to tell me, as far as I know, we only have things written about him.
The next question I've got is that Graham seemed to photograph a lot of buildings that were about to be demolished or were in areas where there was particular change taking place. And do you think that was a deliberate effort on his part to do that, to try and record some of these things that were about to disappear?
Well, definitely. Glasgow, as today, then was a city full of change at that kind of Edwardian, Victorian Victorian Edwardian period, and I think we kind of know, even by the things that he scrapes on his little slides, his little negatives, you know, X building, now demolished. So he wanted to document it. It was, I definitely think it was and he was part of a community. He was part of the Old Glasgow Club, and other clubs that celebrated the history and heritage of Glasgow's, and lots of other people did that too. It was definitely a sort of, there's a bit of nerdiness about him, which I love.
And there's a question asking whether he was part of any formal record society, because at the time that he was photographing, there was this massive rise in societies to record and document change. That, you know, these photographic record societies that were based in camera clubs and separately. Was he part of any formal group, or was this something he did very independently?
I don't know that. That's definitely that would be an interesting line of inquiry. It's not something that I was aware of, that sort of idea of those groups. So that's a really good further research that we can do.
We've got quite a technical question from Scott, who's asking, were most images numbered, and has it let you create a list of names for all? I think he noticed quite a few reverse numbers or printing errors, and was that deliberate?
Yes, so he was very good to a point, and his wife Catherine was very good in that she made lists. We have lovely little notebooks with the lantern slides, for example, and all the reference numbers for that. So they go like one. There's like 80 boxes of them, so it's like one of one of two. So I would say about 80% of them are in that kind of category of having been listed somewhere, whether by him or by his wife Catherine. But he also is very kindly scrapes the numbers on the slides so that we don't sort of walk around going, oh my god, what is this? And you always know that that's a William Graham slide. So yeah, I think that he was quite organised. There are collections in the Mitchell Library which are less pleasurable to try and find things in.
That's very tactful. There's a question from Gavin asking, might the image of the man getting his haircut be associated with the early underground? He says that the cable haul is visible in the foreground.
Yes, I think it's quite possible. That's a really interesting point. Maybe try and match that date up with that.
And then I've got a question actually just about his studio. Obviously we saw two pictures of the studio, the second one towards the end with the horses in front, and this one, was that his only studio, or did he have a couple of studios? Because it looks quite a temporary structure.
It does indeed. As far as I know, that was the only place his studio was. It's certainly the only photograph of any studios. It looks like a little wooden hut. So I think we could probably do a bit more digging into the post office directories. But for example, the post office directory of 1900 just has his own address. So 468 Springburn Road. So that would have been a tenement building. And then he went to his studio. I was looking at a couple of newspapers from Springburn, just to see if he had advertised in the local newspapers. And granted, I only looked at about 6 months. And other photographers advertised their wares, but he didn't during that period. But I think we might find that maybe around about the time he started up as a photographer, he might have advertised. I was looking at 1900, so he did start professionally photographing in 1893. And I should have said that a lot of his collection is portraits. So we've got lots and lots and lots of slides of people in a studio, in their Sunday best and with their hats and things like that. And so he was a sort of working, as well as being an antiquarian type photographer. He did the sort of usual photography stuff to keep the
just before I come to our final question from Mr. Evil, I just wanted to jump in and just ask, you said there were very few women that were photographed. I just wondered whether there are any people of colour that you can identify within his groups of people, and why were there so few women?
Well, I suppose the women that he photographs are working women. There's the ladies that were the servants of the doctor. You've got the milkmaid, the other lady, what was she doing again? Oh, spinning. And really interestingly, just to sort of think about not the attitude, but in William Young's scrapbooks, there is a photograph of William Graham, and it's a sort of razored out. And when you actually find the photograph in William Graham's collection, it's actually a picture of William Graham and his wife Catherine, and she's been sort of razored off. So I mean, I think the Old Glasgow Club, until it opened up to women, it was a gentleman's club, and even then it was predominantly men that were involved in that. I suppose it's just the those times. And your question about people of colour, I haven't noticed any photographs. I think it would be a really good project to maybe go through them and have a look at those street scenes and see, because Glasgow was a place where people were coming from all over the world to work and trade, so they should be there.
Okay, and I think that probably brings us to our final question, which I'd also noted as well, but our questioner is asking whether you could talk a little bit about how people might see and view the collection, and we'll also post contact details in the follow-up after this talk to everyone as well, but how accessible is the collection for people to come and view and see?
You can, with any of our collections, you can make an appointment to see them. We have sort of different types of material, as you'll understand. Some of them are need more protection than others. So with this particular collection, you would make an appointment with us, and I'll send you the booking details. Special collections at glasgowlife.org.uk, and you would view them in the archives search room, which is supervised by a member of staff. We're also able to book on a Saturday morning, the first Saturday of the month. A lot of our collections are accessible just to walk in. We also have Family History Centre in the Mitchell Library. We have general collections. We have music collections. You can hire a study room. You can play a piano. You can book rooms. You can use it as a place to meet. So yeah, we're just one part of the Mitchell Library, and the Mitchell Library's website's also available, so I'll ping that in an email to you as well.
Yeah, and has much of it been digitised at all, so it's viewable on the website?
Some of the photographs and slides have been digitised, but not in a systematic way. It's just one of those sort of resources things. But we can, if there's a photograph that we don't have an image of, you can order copies. But at the moment, there's no website where all these lovely images are. That would be glorious, but it's not there.
Okay, well, that's a perfect point to conclude. So it really just falls to me, firstly, Claire, to say thank you so much for giving up an hour of your evening this evening and to tell us about this wonderful collection of photographs. I suspect you'll be getting some emails and calls over the next few weeks or so from people wanting to see it. So thank you for your time. And Gilly, thank you very much for arranging the talk this evening and for making the introduction. And then finally, thank you to our audience for staying with us this evening. We have recorded this evening, so if you want to go back to it, we'll make the recording and send you all the link in a few days' time. So thank you, everyone, and good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.